Words of our Divine Mother. Our Divine Mother says, in each and every one, the highest consciousness must be the ruler of the life. Our life ought to be governed by the love for truth and thirst for light. Let every one of us be filled with an ardent aspiration for the divine realization, and in answer to the call, the divine presence will be there. With my love and blessings, says our Divine Mother. Words of our Divine Mother, taken from the collective works of our Divine Mother, Volume 15, page 359, date 2nd February 1956. Question: Sweet Mother, how can suffering be overcome? For this, our Divine Mother says, the problem is not as simple as all that. The cause of suffering are innumerable, and its quality always varies a great deal, although the origin of the suffering is one and the same, and comes from the initial action of an anti-divine will. To make this easier to understand, one can divide suffering into two distinct categories, although in practice they are very often mixed. The first is purely egoistic and comes from a feeling that one's rights have been violated and that one has been deprived of one's needs, offended, despoiled, betrayed, injured, etc. This whole category of suffering is clearly the result of hostile action, and it not only opens the door in the consciousness to the influence of the adversary, but is also one of the most powerful ways of acting in the world, the most powerful of all, if in addition there comes its natural and spontaneous consequence, hatred and the desire for revenge in the strong, despair and the wish to die in the weak. Our Divine Mother says the other category of suffering, whose initial cause is the pain of separation created by the adversary, is totally opposite in nature. It is the suffering that comes from divine compassion, the suffering of love that feels compassion for the world's misery, whatever its origin, cause, or effect. But this suffering, which is of a purely psychic character, contains no egoism, no self-pity. It is full of peace and strength and power of action, of faith in the future, and the will for victory. It does not pity, but consoles. It does not identify itself with the ignorant moment in others, but cures and illumines it. It is obvious that in the purity of its essence, only that which is perfectly divine, it is only that which is perfectly divine can feel that suffering, but partially Momentarily, like flashes of lightning behind the dark clouds of egoism, it appears in all who have a vast and generous heart. However, most often in the individual consciousness, it is mixed with that mean and petty self-pity, which is the cause of depression and weakness. Nevertheless, when one is vigilant enough to refuse this mixture, or at least to reduce it to a minimum, one soon realizes that this divine compassion is based on a sublime and eternal joy, which alone has the strength and the power to deliver the world from its ignorance and misery. Our Divine Mother says, and this suffering too will disappear from the universe only with the total disappearance of the adversary and all the effects of his action. Next topic, the inner realization is the key to outer realization, from page 365. Our Divine Mother says, when the adverse forces want to attack those who are around me, and when they do not succeed in making them openly hostile to Sri Aurobindo's work, or in turning them against me personally, they proceed in the matter always in the same way with the same argument. You may have all the inner realization you like, they say, the most beautiful experience possible within the four walls of the ashram, but on the outer plane, your life is spoiled, wasted. There is an abyss that you will never fill between the inner experience and the concrete realization in the world. Our Divine Mother says, this is the number one argument of the adverse forces. I know it. For millions of years, I have heard the same thing repeated, and each time I have unmasked it. It is a falsehood. It is falsehood. Everything that tends to establish a divorce between earth and the spirit is good for them. Everything that separates the inner experience from the divine realization in the world. But it is the contrary that is true. It is the inner realization, that is the key to the outer realization. How can you expect to know the true thing which you have to realize in the world so long as you do not possess the truth of your being? Says our Divine Mother. Next topic, eating the fruit, from page 367, date 19th July 1958. Our Divine Mother says a peach should ripen on the tree. It is a fruit that is to be plucked when the sun is there upon it. At the same time, when the sun falls upon it, you come and you pluck it and bite into it. Then it is absolutely heavenly. There are two fruits like this, the peach and the golden green gauge. It is the same for both. You must take them warm from the tree, bite them, and you are filled with an Edenic taste. Each fruit should be eaten in a special way. Fundamentally, this is the symbol of the earthly paradise and the tree of knowledge. In eating of the fruit of knowledge, you lose your spontaneity of movement and you begin to objectify, to learn, to discuss. Thus, when they had eaten of the fruit, they become full of sin. Our Divine Mother says, I say each fruit should be eaten in its own way. A being living according to its own nature, its own truth, should spontaneously discover its own way of using things. When you live according to the truth of your being, you have no need to learn things. You do them spontaneously according to the inner law. When you follow your nature spontaneously and sincerely, you are divine. As soon as you think, see yourself doing, and begin to discuss, you are full of sin. It is man's mental consciousness that has filled all nature with the idea of sin and all the misery which it brings. Animals are not unhappy in the way we are, not at all, except as Sri Aurobindo says, those that have been corrupted. The corrupted ones are those that live with me. Dogs have the sense of sin and guilt. It is because their whole aspiration is to become like man. Man is God, and then dissimulation, falsehood. Dogs do lie. Men admire that. They say, oh, how intelligent they are. They have lost their divinity. Our Divine Mother says the human species in the spiral ascent is truly at a point which is not pretty. Our Divine Mother says, but isn't a dog more conscious than a tiger? More evolved and higher in the spiral? That is to say, nearer to the divine? To be conscious is not the point. Man is more evolved than the tiger. There is not the shadow of a doubt. But the tiger is more divine than man. You must not confuse things. Two things are quite different. You see, the divine is everywhere and everything. You should never forget that. Not for a second, you should forget that. He is everywhere in everything and unconsciously. But spontaneously and therefore sincerely, everything that is below the mental manifestation is divine without mixture. That is to say, spontaneously by its very nature. It is man with his mind who has introduced the idea of guilt. Naturally, he is much more conscious. That is not to be disputed. It is well understood because what we call consciousness, that is to say, what man call conscious or consciousness, is the power to objectify and mentalize things. It is not the true consciousness, but it is what men call consciousness. So, in this human way, it is understood that man is much more conscious than the animal. But with man comes sin and perversion, which do not exist outside the state that we call conscious, but which is not truly conscious, which simply consists in mentalizing things, in having the capacity to objectify them. It is a curve of ascent, but the curve moves away from the divine, and one must rise much higher to find again naturally a higher divine, for it is a conscious divine, whereas the others are divine without being conscious, spontaneously and instinctively. And our whole moral notion of good and bad, we have thrown all that upon the creation, with our own deformed and perverted consciousness. It is we who have invented it. We are deforming intermediary between the purity of the animal and the divine purity of the gods, says our Divine Mother. Our Divine Mother says in page 419, dated 11th May 1967, you see, in the present condition of the world, circumstances are always difficult. The whole world is in a condition of strife, conflict between the forces of truth and light wanting to manifest and the opposition of all that does not want to change, which represents in the past what is fixed, hardened, and refuses to go. Naturally, each individual feels his own difficulties and is faced by the same obstacles. There is only one way for you. It is a total and complete unconditional surrender. What I mean by that is the giving up not only of your actions, work, ambition, but also of all your feelings, in the sense that all that you do, all that you are, is exclusively for the divine. So, you feel above the surrounding human reactions, not only above them, but protected from them by the wall of the divine's grace. Once you have no more desires, no more attachments, once you have given up all necessity of receiving a reward from human beings, whoever they are, knowing that only reward that is worth getting is the only reward that is worth getting is the one that comes from the Supreme and that never fails. Once you give up the attachment to all exterior things and beings, you at once feel in your heart this presence, this force, this grace that is always with you. And there is no other remedy. It is the only remedy for everybody without exception. To all those who suffer, it is the same thing that has to be said. All suffering is the sign that the surrender is not total. All suffering is the sign that the surrender is not total. Then, when you feel in you a bang like that, instead of saying, oh, this is bad, or this circumstance is difficult, you say, my surrender is not perfect. Then it's all right. And then you feel the grace that helps you, leads you, and you go on. And one day you emerge into that peace that nothing can trouble. You answer to all the contrary forces, the contrary movements, the attacks, the misunderstandings, the bad wills, with the same smile that comes from full confidence in the divine grace. And that is the only way out. There is no other. Our Divine Mother says, this world is a world of conflict, suffering, difficulty, strain. It is made up of it. It has not yet changed. It will take some time before changing. And for each one, there is a possibility of getting out of it. If you lean back on the presence of the Supreme Grace, if you lean back on the presence of the Supreme Grace, that is the only way out. That I have been telling you since long. Like that constantly, says our Divine Mother.